So with President Biden's approval rating continuing to be in the basement, he showed us the other day what he can do to turn things around. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Reiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. If you share my concerns, maybe you could like this video, subscribe to this channel, maybe even click that little bell that will notify you when I post something new. So the other day, President Biden gave a speech that many people are heralding as the best of his presidency. It was a speech in which he directly laid the blame for the January 6th insurrection at the feet of the former president. Now, it's worth noting he didn't specifically mention Donald Trump, but it was clear who he was talking about as he talked about the former president. It was the first time that we've seen a truly full-throated defense of the system of democracy that we have as Americans by the President Biden. And for most of us, this was something that was long overdue. Our hope is that this is just going to be the first step toward charges being brought against Trump and some of his cronies who helped encourage the invasion of the Capitol. Something bolstered by the fact that Attorney General Merrick Garland gave a speech the day before talking about the fact that he was continuing his investigations as going to be kind of moving up the ladder. At the same time, we also hope that it's an indication that President Biden is really going to put the full force of his office and his personality behind the push to get voting rights legislation passed. Last week, Joe Manchin again said that he's skeptical as to some kind of change in the filibuster that will allow voting rights legislation to pass. And as we know, without him, there is no legislation that's going to pass. But the hope still is, given the fact that he is essentially one of the creators of this legislation and the sponsors of it, that he would be willing to do something that will allow this legislation to go through Congress. Chuck Schumer has promised that there's going to be a vote on the floor of the Senate regarding some kind of carve-out to the filibuster that will allow this legislation to go forward. And at this point, it appears that only Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, typical fashion, are holdouts. Hopefully, with President Biden getting more engaged on this issue, we will finally see progress on this front, which really is critical to saving democracy, as President Biden showed quite clearly in his speech the other day. Now, the reason this speech is particularly notable is the response of people has been overwhelmingly positive. Yes, there have been those who are claiming, President Biden is politicizing January 6th, but the truth of the matter is he's providing real leadership for Americans. And in that speech, he showed something that we haven't seen much of over the past year, and that is President Biden's humanity and his fundamental decency. These are President Biden's great strengths, and they're the kinds of things that we hoped would help deliver America from the chaos of the Trump presidency to some sense of normalcy in this era. Obviously, how the economy is doing and other macroeconomic issues are going to be fundamental as to President Biden's approval rating. But they're not the only things that matter. People want to feel like they have someone who's a leader who's in charge. Famously, President Clinton was in the basement with his approval ratings until the Oklahoma City bombing. And he went to Oklahoma City and gave a beautiful speech and was seen as being so compassionate and so involved and such a leader bringing Americans together that it helped bring his approval rating back up. My hope is that we will start to see that happening with President Biden's approval rating. But one speech is not going to do it all alone. My hope is that what we're going to see is much more of President Biden speaking directly to the American people. The classic example of that, of course, is FDR with his fireside chats and how he was able to provide kind of hope to Americans while we were going through the Depression and then World War II. Even more importantly than his policies, his fireside chats are what led to his enormous popularity among Americans of all stripes. If we can start to see President Biden engaging directly with Americans more in circumstances where they'll see his fundamental decency and his humanity and his caring nature and his commitment to the welfare both of our system and of average everyday Americans, all things that are huge contrast to what we experienced with Donald Trump, my guess is we will start to see President Biden's numbers crawling back. Now, I understand the philosophy of trying to limit access to the president that they've been following. And indeed, this has generally been the preferred approach of political strategists ever since President Reagan was in office. President Reagan, with the leadership of former PR executive Michael Deaver, was brilliant in managing the message by limiting access to the presidency. Essentially, the only coverage that was allowed of President Reagan occurred in tightly organized circumstances, where President Reagan's political operation controlled the message and made sure that no matter what the media wanted to say, that President Reagan's message was still getting out. Famously, there's a story about a TV reporter who decided that they were going to do a story pointing out how President Reagan's rhetoric is so vacuous, that he goes around making all kinds of pledges, standing in front of the American flag and making all kinds of pledges to the American people, things that he doesn't follow up on. The story was devastating, the reporter thought, and included all kinds of examples of President Reagan speaking to audiences, saying one thing and then doing another. After the story ran, this reporter was quite surprised. He got a call from Michael Deaver thanking him for the great story about President Reagan. The reporter was puzzled. How could this be? Well, Michael Deaver explained that those images, the images of all the people standing there waving the American flags, and President Reagan with his grandfatherly looks, standing there seeming like America's father, were exactly the image that the Reagan administration were trying to project. So that philosophy is really the one that's been followed by presidential administrations since then. The problem is we're in a different era from the Reagan era. Now we deal with a 24-hour news cycle, and even more than 24-hour news cycle, we deal with constant discussion of politics on social media, like this. The result is no longer do we have the mainstream media standing there covering what the president says and then talking about it. Now we have all kinds of different voices constantly expressing their opinions. The news cycle, as a result, has become much shorter, and people's memories much shorter as a result as well. And the fact that President Biden is not engaging with that news cycle makes him seem as if he's a non-participant in the activities that are going on, falling prey exactly to the accusation that his opponents have given that he stayed in the basement and avoided any kind of interaction which would reveal the limitations of his age. Now, I think it's quite clear that President Biden is as sharp and as healthy as any president has ever been. And while it made sense that he would isolate himself in his basement during the presidential campaign when we were dealing with COVID and when he was running against President Trump, now Americans want to see a leader who's taking command. And President Biden's failure to do that has really been, in my opinion, the source of his falling popularity. That being said, though, changing that could also be his route to being able to rebuild his base. Well, if you agree with me or disagree with me, I'd love to see your comments down below. And if you could like this video and subscribe to this channel, that'd be a huge help as well. And here's another video that I did earlier about President Biden's approval rating and the issues that come from it. I'll see you in the next video. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.